I'm not married. I don't have an apartment. I have no home. It's very disturbing.
For decades, Susan Dey was one of Hollywood's brightest and most beloved stars, a quiet beauty whose talent, mystery, and grace made her unforgettable. From her early rise on The Partridge Family to her powerful performances on L.A. Law, she became the kind of actress people didn't just admire, they cherished. But now, at 72, the story of Susan Dey has taken a heartbreaking turn, one that many fans never saw coming. Her sudden disappearance from the spotlight left millions asking the same question: what really happened to her? Why did one of television's most gifted performers walk away at the height of her success, leaving behind a career others would have fought desperately to keep? And more importantly, what has she been facing all these years, far away from fame, cameras, and the world that once adored her? The truth is far more emotional than anyone imagined. Close friends say Susan hasn't been the same for years. The trauma she carried from childhood, the pressures of fame, and the painful relationships that shaped her life all caught up with her in ways that left deep emotional scars. And the life she lives today, quiet, distant, and almost entirely hidden from the world, reveals just how much she has endured. But there's more. A recent update about her health and the heartbreaking reality of her day-to-day life at 72 has brought fans to tears. Those who loved her are struggling to accept how drastically things have changed. For the woman who once lit up living rooms across America, this is the story Susan never wanted told, one filled with silent battles, shocking revelations, and a courage far greater than anything she showed on screen. To understand what happened to Susan Dey at 72, you must first understand the quiet pain behind her early rise to fame. Unlike many young stars who grew up dreaming of Hollywood, Susan never asked for the spotlight. She was shy, introverted, and deeply self-critical. When she was cast as Laurie Partridge at just 17, she was suddenly thrust into a world she wasn't emotionally prepared for. Overnight, she went from a private teenager to a national sensation, but behind her radiant smile on The Partridge Family, Susan battled insecurities that would haunt her for years. She suffered from severe body image issues, constantly comparing herself to others, believing she wasn't good enough, and pushing her body far beyond healthy limits. At one point, those closest to her feared her struggle with eating disorders would end her career or, worse, endanger her life. But the pressures of being a teenage beauty icon in the 1970s left her feeling she had no choice but to push on. Her internal battles grew even heavier as she entered adulthood. Fame never felt like a blessing to her. It felt like a weight she could never set down. And when L.A. Law skyrocketed her popularity again in the 80s and 90s, the attention she received reopened wounds she had spent years trying to heal. Playing the strong, brilliant Grace Van Owen on screen made people believe she was confident and uncheckable. But, in truth, she was still that fragile young girl hiding her insecurities behind a borrowed face. The pressure wasn't the only burden she carried. Susan's personal relationships became another source of heartbreak. Her complicated feelings for her Partridge Family co-star, David Cassidy, left a deep mark on her. She adored him more than she ever admitted publicly, but the feelings were never fully returned. Cassidy later confessed in interviews that he had been too young, too reckless, and too self-involved to understand what she truly felt for him. His emotional distance devastated her, and their fragile friendship eventually fell apart completely. Susan was so hurt by their history that she refused to appear in any Partridge Family reunions if Cassidy was involved. She carried that heartbreak quietly for decades, but perhaps the most painful moment came when rumors spread about her emotional exhaustion and growing desire to escape Hollywood altogether. Friends and colleagues began noticing how tired she looked, how drained she seemed by the industry that had once celebrated her. The long hours on set, the endless public expectations, and the emotional weight of her past created a storm she could no longer hold back. By the early 2000s, Susan reached a breaking point. She didn't make an announcement. She didn't hold a press conference. She simply stepped away. She turned down roles, canceled appearances, and quietly disappeared from the public eye. To the world, it felt sudden and shocking. But to those who knew her, it was long overdue. Today, at 72, Susan Dey lives a life so far removed from Hollywood that many fans wouldn't recognize her. She avoids cameras, interviews, and public events almost completely. Not because she's bitter, but because she's finally protecting the one thing she never had. During her youth, peace. But as she's aged, new challenges have emerged, challenges that reveal the most heartbreaking part of her story yet. And in part 3, you'll see exactly what those challenges are, and why her friends are more worried than ever. At 72 years old, Susan Dey lives a life that is almost the complete opposite of her Hollywood beginnings. The cameras are gone, the red carpets are long behind her, and the world that once adored her barely gets a glimpse of her anymore. But beneath that silence is a reality that is far more emotional than fans ever imagined. In recent years, those closest to Susan have quietly shared concerns about her health, both physical and emotional. She has become increasingly private, rarely leaving her home except for essential appointments or brief walks where she avoids attention. Friends say she values stillness above everything now, but that stillness sometimes feels too quiet, too isolating, too heavy. Part of that isolation comes from the lingering emotional scars she never fully healed. Despite decades passing since her early fame, the pressure she faced as a young actress left deep marks that age has only made more visible. She still struggles with the insecurities that once plagued her during the Partridge Family, especially regarding her appearance and worth. Aging, something she once accepted gracefully, has become a painful mirror she tries to avoid. And then there is the loneliness. Susan never embraced the social lifestyle of Hollywood. She preferred small gatherings, close connections, and quiet nights. But as the years passed, many of the people she once relied on moved away, passed on, or drifted out of her life. Even her former co-stars grew more distant. The painful memories tied to certain relationships especially. David Cassidy kept her from reconnecting with the people who once felt like family. What troubles her friends most is how she has retreated deeper into solitude. She rarely answers old colleagues. She turns down invitations, fan letters, and reunion requests. She has no interest in public nostalgia. To some, it looks like peace. To others, it looks like heartbreak. But the deepest worry comes from recent reports about her declining energy and struggles with mobility. Though she has not spoken publicly about her health, people close to her say she has been dealing with a combination of age-related issues: stiffness, chronic pain, fatigue, and emotional withdrawal. Nothing dramatic or headline-worthy, but the kind of gradual decline that quietly reshapes a person's entire life. One friend revealed that Susan spends much of her time at home reading, painting, or simply sitting near a window, watching the world pass by without her. She's fragile, they said, not in body alone, but in spirit. Hollywood, with all its noise and chaos, never learned how deeply sensitive she truly was. That sensitivity made her a remarkable actress, but it also made the pressures unbearable. And now, at 72, she is living with the weight of all those years, all those expectations, and all those private battles she fought quietly, without ever asking for help. Yet, despite the sadness, there is beauty in her story too. Susan is finally free from judgment, pressure, and expectation. She doesn't owe anyone an explanation. She doesn't have to perform, smile, or pretend anymore. For the first time since she was a teenager, she is living life on her own terms, even if those terms look painfully quiet from the outside. But there is one more chapter to her story, one that reveals the moment she made the decision to walk away forever, and the emotional truth behind why she never returned. The moment Susan Day disappeared from Hollywood wasn't a sudden collapse or a dramatic scandal. It was a slow, quiet breaking point, a moment when she finally realized she no longer recognized the person the world expected her to be. And at 72, looking back, that decision to walk away may be the most courageous act of her life. For decades, Susan lived under the weight of expectations she never asked for. Hollywood wanted her to be perfect. Fans wanted her to be accessible. Studios wanted her to be endlessly strong. But the reality was simple. Susan was human, sensitive, and deeply affected by the emotional toll of her early fame. The pressures she carried as a teenager never fully faded. They only buried themselves deeper. The final turning point came in the early 2000s, during a project that should have been a fresh start. On set, she found herself overwhelmed, drained, and emotionally distant from the craft she once loved. She realized she wasn't acting anymore, she was enduring. Instead of feeling inspired, she felt trapped. Instead of feeling creative, she felt a hollow ache she couldn't shake out one day. After filming a particularly exhausting scene, she walked off set, sat alone in her trailer, and stared at her reflection. The woman looking back at her seemed tired emotionally, physically, spiritually. She whispered to herself, almost in disbelief, "I can't do this anymore." Her team thought she needed a break. Producers assumed she'd return after a few months. Fans waited for news. But Susan never looked back. She moved quietly into a private life, far from cameras and noise, searching for the peace she had lost somewhere between adolescence and stardom. For the first time in her life, she began choosing herself, but even in her self-imposed exile, the ghosts of her past lingered. The unresolved tension with David Cassidy continued to weigh on her heart for years. His struggles with addiction, his troubled relationships, and his declining health brought back a flood of emotions she had spent decades trying to bury. When David passed away in 2017, Susan did not appear publicly, but those close to her say the news shattered her. She grieved privately, regretting the fractured bond they never repaired. As the years passed, Susan became increasingly protective of her privacy. She avoided interviews, red carpets, and reunions. Fans who grew up watching her wondered why she never returned, why she never shared her story. But the truth was that Hollywood had taken more from her than people realized. She wasn't running from fame, she was healing from it. At 72, Susan lives quietly, surrounded by a small circle of trusted loved ones. Her days are simple and slow, filled with reading, journaling, and quiet reflection. Though her health has become more fragile, she continues to find comfort in the peaceful routines she built for herself. There are no cameras, no scripts, no directors, just her own life, finally lived on her own terms. And yet, for all her silence, her legacy remains powerful. She inspired millions without even understanding her impact. She brought warmth, intelligence, and vulnerability to every role she touched. She endured pressures few young stars could survive. And though her story is filled with heartbreak, it is also filled with resilience. The truth is, what happened to Susan Day is not a tragedy. It is the story of a woman who chose peace over pressure. A woman who fought privately, suffered silently, and ultimately saved herself by stepping away from a world that never truly saw her. And when fans see her now graying hair, gentle smile, quieter presence, they aren't just seeing an aging star. They are seeing someone who finally found the one thing Hollywood could never give her. As Susan Day entered her 70s, the world expected the usual celebrity cycle: reunions, memoirs, talk show appearances, convention autographs. But instead, she did something far more shocking to Hollywood. she walked away from it entirely, choosing a life of silence, privacy, and reflection. And for many fans, that is where the real heartbreak begins, because behind her gentle smile and polished poise, Susan spent decades carrying emotional wounds that never truly healed. Fame had taken her childhood, her confidence, and some of her closest relationships. And though it gave her adoration, it also took a toll few people ever understood. By the time she reached 72, she wasn't chasing nostalgia, she was trying to protect what remained of herself. Today, Susan lives a life almost completely removed from the industry she once dominated. She stopped giving interviews nearly 2 decades ago. She avoids public events. Most people don't even know where she lives because she deliberately keeps her location private. What she has embraced quietly and without fanfare is peace gardening, reading, painting, and staying close to the few people who never treated her like a commodity. And perhaps the most emotional part of her story is how she looks back on the Partridge Family. She has admitted in rare past comments that she does not participate in cast reunions because the memories are complicated. She was a teenager struggling with body image, loneliness, and pressure, all while millions watched her every week. Even her unspoken love for David Cassidy left a scar she carried for years, especially after he publicly dismissed her feelings in interviews. It was a moment that deeply embarrassed her and permanently damaged their relationship. Yet despite everything, she never expressed bitterness. Instead, Susan chose forgiveness, distance, and healing. At 72, she is not chasing spotlight or legacy. She is simply living life on her terms, quietly, privately, and with a dignity few stars ever achieve. And while fans may wish she'd return to Hollywood, the truth is far more beautiful. After a life of pressure, she finally found peace. Her journey is not tragic because of scandal or downfall, it's tragic because she was a brilliant actress who never received the emotional protection she deserved until much later in life. But it is also inspiring because she survived an industry that consumes most people whole.